My love for you was so big that after you, I don't think that I will ever love someone like I love you. Ever.
I've been waiting
Slower
to have sex. No, because I'm so frustrated.
So is he.
This doesn't let me talk.
And listen to you. Don't insult me.
I just want to talk. Let me express myself.
The internet did not just react. It exploded. Because while one half of this story was glowing under soft wedding lights and smiling for carefully framed photos, the other half was unraveling in a way that felt almost too raw to watch. And that contrast is exactly what split the fandom straight, down the middle. When news broke that Gino Palazzolo had officially moved forward and married Natalie, timelines filled with congratulations, shock, sarcasm, and disbelief all at once. Because this was the same man viewers once watched crumble under jealousy accusations, explosive arguments, and emotional chaos. With Jasmine Pineda, and suddenly he looked calm, composed, almost reborn. Meanwhile, Jasmine's side of the narrative felt nothing like a fairy tale reset. It felt heavy, unstable, and painfully human as her relationship with Matt appeared rushed, confusing, and emotionally loaded in a way that made even her strongest supporters quietly ask whether she was trying to heal or simply trying to outrun heartbreak before it caught up to her. What made this moment so addictive to watch wasn't just that Gino remarried after divorce drama, but the timing. Because emotional timelines rarely match legal ones, and when one person seems to upgrade while the other appears to spiral, the audience doesn't just observe, they judge. Some viewers claim Gino had finally leveled up, traded chaos for peace, and found someone who didn't push him into public humiliation, while others argued he didn't evolve at all, that he simply escaped, choosing comfort over confrontation and stability over depth. And then there was the uncomfortable question that no one wanted to say out loud, but everyone was thinking, was this genuine healing, or was this a rebound disguised as destiny? At the same time, Jasmine's move toward Matt felt intense, accelerated, and emotionally urgent. Like someone trying to prove they were still wanted, still chosen, still powerful, especially after watching their ex move on publicly. That urgency is what triggered suspicion. Because when love moves at lightning speed right after devastation, it can look less like passion and more like panic. Fans started dissecting her tone in interviews, her body language in photos, her social media captions, looking for clues that would confirm whether she was thriving or quietly unraveling behind filtered smiles. And that's where the emotional contrast became impossible to ignore. Gino looked steady, Jasmine looked volatile, and perception in reality television is everything. But here's where it gets psychologically fascinating. Because power in relationships is rarely about who loved more, it's about who leaves stronger. During their turbulent run on 90 Day Fiance, Jasmine often appeared emotionally dominant, louder, more expressive, more willing to confront, while Gino seemed defensive, insecure, and reactive. Now the energy felt reversed. He was the one presenting stability and permanence through marriage, while she was navigating uncertainty and public scrutiny, and that flip is what made fans uncomfortable, because it challenged the narrative they had grown used to. So, was the wedding a genuine new chapter for Gino, or was it a carefully timed statement that said, I survived? Was Jasmine's new romance a fresh start, or was it emotional self-preservation wrapped in romance? And maybe the most uncomfortable question of all, did the divorce free them, or did it expose who was more dependent on the chaos than they ever admitted? Because in moments like this, the real shift doesn't happen when papers are signed or rings are exchanged. It happens when the person once perceived as weaker suddenly looks stronger, and the person once in control looks destabilized. And right when the audience thought they understood who had won this breakup, a subtle but undeniable change began unfolding that would completely complicate the power dynamic all over again. What most people are calling a breakup was never just a breakup. Because if you actually go back and rewatch the patterns, the tone shifts, the way their arguments escalated and then softened into apologies that felt more like survival than resolution, it becomes obvious that what happened between. Gino Palazzolo and Jasmine Pineda was not a simple ending, but a slow emotional earthquake that had been cracking the foundation long before the cameras captured the final collapse. On 90 Day Fiance, viewers didn't just witness disagreements, they watched cycles. And cycles are important because they tell you whether two people are solving problems or just rehearsing them in different outfits, and Gino and Jasmine had a rhythm that was intense, addictive, and strangely magnetic even when it was clearly unstable. There were the explosive confrontations about trust, the infamous jealousy spirals, the accusations about past messages and hidden conversations, and the moments where Jasmine's anger felt volcanic, but if you look closely, you also saw flashes of vulnerability that complicated the narrative. Because she wasn't raging for entertainment, she was reacting from a place that looked deeply afraid of abandonment. And that nuance often gets erased when the loudest voice in the room becomes the easiest one to blame. At the same time, Gino's quiet demeanor wasn't always innocence. Sometimes it looked like emotional withdrawal, like someone who would shut down instead of leaning in, who would deflect rather than directly address the insecurity sitting right in front of him, and avoidance can be just as destructive as confrontation, even if it looks calmer on the surface. That's why reframing their split matters. Because this was not simply two incompatible personalities deciding to part ways, it was two people locked into a trauma bond where intensity became proof of love, where the highs felt euphoric precisely because the lows were so devastating. And when that kind of dynamic breaks, it doesn't feel clean or mutual, it feels like withdrawal. Trauma bonding thrives on unpredictability, and unpredictability is exactly what kept viewers glued to their storyline. Because every apology felt fragile and every promise felt temporary, yet somehow they kept returning to each other as if the chaos itself was glue. And here's the part that complicates everything. Jasmine was not always wrong even when she was loud, because some of her concerns about transparency and loyalty were rooted in real incidents that played out on screen. Moments where Gino's decisions fed her insecurity rather than calming it. Yet Gino wasn't always weak either, because being constantly confronted and questioned can push anyone into defensive survival mode. It wasn't hero versus villain, it was fear versus fear, clashing in public. So when the separation finally happened, it didn't feel like a door closing, it felt like exhaustion winning. But that raises a deeper question that fans are still debating quietly. Who emotionally checked out first? Was it Jasmine, whose reactions grew more desperate toward the end? Or was it Gino, whose detachment sometimes felt like someone already halfway gone? And if you trace the trajectory carefully, you start to wonder whether the ending was inevitable from the very first major trust crack. Because once trust is fractured repeatedly under public pressure, rebuilding it becomes less about love and more about endurance. The real twist isn't that they broke up, it's that once they did, the emotional energy that used to bind them had to go somewhere, and watching where that energy redirected might reveal something far more revealing than the breakup itself. Because the question isn't who hurt more, it's who ultimately gained more from finally letting go. If you only watch the highlight reels and recent interviews, you would almost believe you were looking at a completely different man. Because the version of Gino Palazzolo standing beside Natalie looks softer, slower, almost intentionally measured in a way that feels like a direct contrast to the jittery, defensive energy he carried during the most explosive moments of his relationship with Jasmine Pineda on 90 Day Fiance, and that transformation has sparked a new debate that might be even more intense than the breakup itself. Because rebranding after chaos is easy to applaud, but it is also easy to misread, especially in reality television where image management is half the battle and perception can evolve faster than personality. When Gino appears in recent clips, there is a visible shift in posture, with shoulders more relaxed, eye contact more sustained, and responses that feel less reactive and more rehearsed. And while that could genuinely signal growth, it could also signal someone who has learned the cost of emotional exposure and decided to move more cautiously in public. Natalie's presence amplifies this change because she is positioned almost as an antidote to prior turbulence, speaking in a calmer tone, engaging without escalating, offering a dynamic that looks less like a battlefield and more like a negotiation table. And that contrast alone has convinced many viewers that Gino finally found peace. But calm does not automatically equal compatibility, And this is where the conversation becomes more analytical than emotional. In franchise history, audiences have seen cast members temporarily stabilize in new relationships simply because the conflict triggers are different, not because the core insecurities disappeared. And if you track patterns across seasons, emotional avoidance has a way of resurfacing once novelty fades. Gino's social media posture also plays into this narrative shift because his captions are more polished, the images more curated, and the messaging more controlled, which could reflect maturity, or it could reflect strategic awareness after years of being dragged through online commentary. Public statements from Gino now lean heavily into themes of gratitude, fresh starts, and building a future. Language that feels intentional and forward-focused, but it also leaves subtle gaps that raise questions about whether he is evolving internally or simply repositioning externally. It is possible for someone to crave stability so intensely after chaos that they overcorrect, choosing comfort as a shield rather than as a foundation, and comfort can feel like love in the beginning simply because it is quieter. That is why Natalie's role is so pivotal in this narrative, because she is not just a partner, she is symbolic contrast, representing the before and after in a way that almost feels cinematic, and when viewers compare clips side by side, the difference is undeniable. Yet difference does not automatically mean depth, and sometimes what looks like growth is simply relief. The subtle humor in all of this is that reality television has trained audiences to celebrate dramatic turnaround, as if personality can be upgraded like software after one hard reset, when in reality, emotional patterns are stubborn and rarely disappear without serious introspection. So, is this piece authentic, or is it performance refined by experience? Does feeling comfortable mean he is in love, or does it simply mean he is no longer in crisis? And perhaps the biggest variable that complicates every assumption is the one development that moved this story from romance into legacy, from dating into permanence, because once the pregnancy entered the picture, the stakes shifted in a way that no rebrand alone could control. And that is where the narrative stops being about optics and starts being about responsibility. The moment the pregnancy announcement went public, the entire conversation shifted from gossip to gravity. Because suddenly this was no longer about who moved on faster or who looked happier in filtered photos. It was about legacy, permanence, and the kind of responsibility that changes how a person is perceived overnight. When Gino Palazzolo confirmed he was expecting a child with Natalie, the reaction was immediate and divided, with some fans celebrating what they saw as a full-circle redemption arc and others raising eyebrows at the speed of it all, quietly questioning whether stability that arrives this quickly can truly be stable. On 90 Day Fiance, viewers had watched Gino struggle with trust, insecurity, and emotional overwhelm, so the idea of him stepping into fatherhood felt both heartwarming and jarring at the same time. What intensified the reaction even more was the decision to publicly confirm details, including DNA verification, which transformed the narrative from speculation to certainty and, in many ways, functioned as a power move. In a world where reality television thrives on rumor and doubt, presenting proof is not just about reassurance, it is about control. And control shifts perception. By removing ambiguity, Gino positioned himself as confident and accountable, almost daring critics to question the legitimacy of his new chapter. But that transparency also carried psychological weight, because when milestones are announced so publicly, they stop being private joys and become communal property, open to applause and scrutiny in equal measure. There is something deeply human about wanting validation during transformative moments, especially after a very public breakup with Jasmine Pineda, and fatherhood, whether intentional or accelerated, can feel like the ultimate proof of maturity. Yet, escalation at this pace brings risk, because emotional wounds do not automatically heal simply because new responsibilities appear, and sometimes the excitement of building something new can temporarily mask unresolved issues from the past. That is why some viewers remain cautious rather than celebratory, asking whether the timeline allowed for genuine reflection or whether momentum simply carried everything forward before anyone had the chance to slow down. The psychological shift from boyfriend to father is massive, because fatherhood is not just a role, it is an identity. And identity changes influence behavior in ways that romance alone cannot. A partner can be replaced, but a child cannot. And that permanence alters power dynamics dramatically. Suddenly, Gino is not just the man who survived a turbulent marriage, he is potentially the man building a family. And that narrative carries social credibility that romance by itself rarely achieves. However, credibility also brings pressure, because once you step into the role of provider and protector in front of a global audience, every misstep feels amplified. This is where tension begins to creep in, because transformation under public observation can feel performative even when it is sincere, and the weight of expectations can push someone to double down on an image they feel obligated to maintain. Is this fatherhood shift something deeply rooted and permanent, or is it a chapter still vulnerable to the same insecurities that once destabilized him? And what kind of pressure builds when your baby news becomes trending content rather than an intimate milestone shared quietly among family? The stakes escalated from romance to legacy in a matter of weeks, and just when fans were still adjusting to the idea of Gino as a father, another announcement quietly solidified that this was not a temporary phase, but a formal commitment that would seal the narrative in a way no speculation could undo. When the wedding finally happened, it didn't feel like just a romantic milestone. It felt like a statement carefully placed at the center of a very public narrative, almost as if Gino Palisolo wasn't only marrying Natalie, but also marrying a new identity. One that distanced him from chaos and repositioned him as stable, chosen, and settled in a way that felt intentional. In the world of 90 Day Fiance, marriage is more than paperwork. It is symbolism, it is proof of permanence, and for someone whose last union unraveled so publicly, walking down the aisle again carried a kind of narrative weight that could not be ignored. The optics were powerful, clean ceremony visuals, composed body language, smiles that looked steady rather than strained, and captions that leaned into gratitude and fresh beginnings, which many fans interpreted as the ultimate redemption arc. There is something undeniably strategic about timing a wedding after a turbulent divorce, because it creates a sense of closure not just for the couple, but for the audience. And closure in reality television is currency. By formalizing his new relationship, Gino effectively closed a chapter that had been defined by explosive arguments with Jasmine, jealousy scandals, and emotional volatility. And in doing so, he invited viewers to rewrite him as someone who had learned, grown, and evolved. Image rehabilitation does not require perfection. It requires contrast. And the contrast between his previous turmoil and current calm did most of the storytelling on its own. But here's where sharp observation cuts through celebration. Because marriage, while symbolic, does not automatically erase pattern. And history across the franchise has shown that unresolved insecurities do not disappear simply because rings are exchanged. A ceremony can signal commitment, but it cannot guarantee compatibility. And that tension is exactly why audience reaction remains split. Some viewers applauded him, framing the wedding as proof that he deserved peace after enduring emotional storms, while others questioned whether the calm was sustainable or simply the honeymoon phase amplified by cameras and curated posts. What made this period even more intriguing was the near silence from Jasmine's side. A silence that felt louder than any dramatic outburst ever could. While Gino's wedding photos circulated and congratulations poured in, Jasmine's relative quiet created a vacuum that viewers rushed to fill with speculation, wondering whether she was watching from afar, processing privately, or preparing her own next move. Silence in moments like this is rarely empty. It is loaded, and that absence of commentary fueled curiosity rather than extinguished it. Strategically speaking, the wedding functioned as a full-stop punctuation mark in Gino's storyline, a declaration that he had not only moved on but anchored himself somewhere new, and yet the narrative never truly ends that cleanly in the reality TV universe. Because while one side of the story appeared sealed with vows and official documentation, questions lingered quietly beneath the surface. Was Jasmine observing the shift and recalibrating her own direction? Was Matt, the man she had aligned herself with, offering the same level of visible stability? Or was that chapter built on shakier ground than anyone wanted to admit? And just when viewers assumed that Gino's marriage had definitively tipped the power balance and closed the emotional chapter for good, a development from Jasmine's side emerged that reframed the competition entirely and suggested that she was not stepping out of the spotlight without making. Her own statement after the wedding, Jasmine's world seemed to tilt in a direction that many fans had feared, a shift from hope to humiliation that unfolded in painfully public ways. Following her split with Gino, she had thrown herself into a rebound with Matt, seeking stability, reassurance, and perhaps a sense of regained control. On-screen moments suggested she believed in this next chapter fully, but the reality quickly complicated. Small cracks appeared in her optimism, overly eager declarations, rushed plans, and moments where her trust seemed granted before it was earned. It wasn't malicious, it was human. Her behavior revealed the emotional pattern of someone who had just lost a long-term attachment and was trying to fill the void before processing grief, yet in doing so, she exposed herself to disappointment that would land harder because of the visibility of every choice. The revelation about Matt's intentions, aired and circulated through social media discussions, felt like a betrayal amplified tenfold. He was positioned as both a comfort and a cautionary figure, someone who offered the illusion of stability but whose actions did not match the trust Jasmine placed in him. Fans watching could see the discrepancy even before Jasmine fully acknowledged it, creating a sense of dramatic irony that made every public interaction tense. And yet, it's essential to recognize that she wasn't making these decisions in a vacuum. Trauma bonding and the fear of abandonment cycle can push even the most self-aware individual into repeating patterns they vowed to escape, a psychological push-pull that becomes almost impossible to break under emotional pressure and scrutiny. Critiquing her behavior without judgment reveals a tension many can relate to, how desperation and longing can cloud judgment, especially when someone feels their chances for love or stability are slipping. She accelerated intimacy, committed publicly, and ignored small red flags, all while seeking validation not only from Matt, but from the fandom that had invested so heavily in her story. This created a perfect storm where public sympathy surged, yet private vulnerability left her exposed. It was a visible emotional collapse, one that contrasted starkly with Gino's composed public rebirth, and the juxtaposition only deepened the narrative tension. Fans couldn't help but question whether rushing into the new relationship was a mistake. Did Matt mislead her? Or did she move too fast under the weight of heartbreak? Both possibilities coexisted, fueling the social media debates that turned her personal misfortune into collective speculation. And as her confidence eroded, behaviors that once seemed assertive now read as impulsive, each decision echoing the very mistakes she had previously warned against in her own on-screen reflections. In this arc, the darkest patterns of human behavior become painfully visible. The same hope that drives someone forward can also lead to their most humiliating setback. Fans watched as she oscillated between optimism and anxiety, her reactions a textbook example of fear of abandonment mixed with public scrutiny. Every failed expectation and every public misstep compounded the emotional tension, making viewers wonder whether she could break free from the cycle, or if desperation had completely clouded her judgment, setting the stage for the most heart-wrenching moment yet. After the public humiliation with Matt, Jasmine retreated into a space that felt almost unrecognizable compared to her earlier bold persona. The cameras captured little, but fans noticed the absence. Her usual social media updates slowed to a trickle, and the confident posts that once invited engagement were replaced with silence. It wasn't just about love lost. This was the beginning of a deeper struggle, a confrontation with her own identity. Suddenly, she wasn't just navigating heartbreak, she was contending with the pressure of motherhood, the uncertainty of visa issues, and the relentless scrutiny of a fandom that alternated between sympathy and judgment. Each facet of her life compounded, creating a perfect storm of emotional strain that no one could easily untangle. Being a public figure meant every decision was magnified. Her withdrawal was interpreted in countless ways. Some saw it as strength, others as weakness. The reality is far more complex. Jasmine was navigating not only the collapse of her romantic world, but also a crisis of self-definition. When a person's relationships are the primary source of public and personal validation, their absence can make you question your purpose entirely. Motherhood alone is a full-time emotional job, but when combined with the demands of a reality franchise and the ever-watchful eye of social media, it becomes an intense pressure cooker. Fans debated whether she was emotionally capable of handling it all, yet it was hard to ignore that the silence itself was a statement she needed space to rebuild. Accountability didn't disappear in this isolation. Some of her struggles were self-inflicted, rushing into Matt had consequences, and no amount of public sympathy could erase that. But empathy is essential here. She wasn't reckless out of malice. She was human, navigating complex emotions under a microscope. It's a reminder that emotional growth rarely follows a linear path. Her story illustrates the collision of personal vulnerability with public expectation, the fine line between self-preservation and self-sabotage, and how quickly hope can become a double-edged sword when exposure is constant. Questions began to spiral in the public imagination. Could Jasmine rebuild her identity without leaning on a romantic partner? Was public sympathy enough to sustain her while she redefined herself? Fans speculated endlessly. Each pause in her social media presence, each unexplained absence from the narrative became a source of curiosity, worry, and debate. The tension escalated not because of scandal, but because the human struggle was so relatable. Who among us hasn't felt unmoored after a series of personal setbacks? And here, it was broadcast for millions to witness, dissect, and emotionally invest in. Isolation also magnified the stakes. She had to navigate bureaucracy, motherhood, and personal healing while watching Gino thrive publicly. Every celebratory post from him was a subtle reminder of the emotional gap between them. Each fan interaction, or lack thereof, fed a growing narrative of struggle versus triumph, failure versus success. This section of her story is not just heartbreak, it is a portrait of survival under scrutiny, of someone wrestling with their own identity while the world watches. And as her internal battle intensified, the online fan factions began to fracture, debates escalated, and the next storm of social media warfare was about to erupt, setting the stage for a showdown that would pull everyone back into the drama. As Jasmine wrestled with her own identity crisis, the fandom exploded into chaos, dividing itself sharply between Team Gino and Team Jasmine. Social media feeds became battlegrounds where loyalty, anger, and judgment collided. Every post, comment, and reaction was weaponized. Some fans celebrated Gino's apparent redemption, praising his calm demeanor and new fatherly image, while others rallied around Jasmine, defending her heartbreak and criticizing how quickly the narrative seemed to favor him. Hashtags trended and then vanished, only to be replaced by the next volley of debates, each side claiming moral high ground, each side certain their perspective was the truth of the story. Reality TV had always been performative, but this season, the stakes weren't just on the screen, they were projected onto millions of personal screens, where viewers inserted their own experiences, insecurities, and judgments. This wasn't just entertainment, it was collective storytelling. A culture shift where audience participation became essential to the drama itself. People weren't just watching the split or the wedding, they were shaping it. Every gif, every reaction meme, every thread dissecting Jasmine's body language or Gino's public statements added layers to a story they partially controlled. Fans projected their own relationships, their fears, their successes and failures onto the players. Suddenly, a simple romance or breakup became a mirror for millions of private emotional realities, making the stakes feel personal even if the characters were thousands of miles away. Yet, the reality was more complicated than social media made it appear. Reality TV editing had always been a manipulative tool, choosing which reactions to highlight, which confessions to air, and which moments to omit. A fan might see Gino as a hero and Jasmine as a victim, but a different cut of footage could tell a subtly different story. The edits encouraged polarization, magnifying emotional peaks and concealing quieter, reflective moments that might complicate the narrative. Fans often forget that what seems authentic online is often a carefully curated emotional spectacle, designed to sustain engagement, stir debate, and keep people returning for the next twist. Still, the war raged on. Each post sparked counters, each fan theory ignited rebuttals, and every narrative thread had the potential to reshape the way the audience viewed the actual event. Who truly controlled the narrative, Gino and Jasmine, or the millions of voices interpreting their lives in real time? And even as public sympathy fluctuated, the emotional investment was undeniable. People were arguing with passion because they felt ownership over the story. The tension escalated when updates began trickling in that no one expected. Rumors about family reactions, behind-the-scenes revelations, and social media missteps started to surface, not from official channels, but from insider leaks, creating entirely new battleground. The audience, hungry for fresh content, responded with frenzy, debating facts, interpretations, and potential consequences, never fully sure what was real or manufactured. The fandom had evolved beyond simple team wars. It had become a cultural phenomenon, a public experiment in how narratives are consumed, contested, and internalized. And just as the sides hardened and the arguments grew louder, the next wave of updates arrived, shaking assumptions and threatening to redefine the entire emotional hierarchy in ways nobody could have anticipated. The gossip started subtly, just whispers online, but quickly escalated into full-blown speculation. Rumors about Gino's hair had fans scanning every Instagram post, every video clip, every glimpse of his forehead for signs of a transplant. Some were convinced he had gone under the knife, others swore it was all natural, enhanced by clever angles and lighting. The obsession wasn't really about hair, it was about control. Fans wanted proof that the new Gino was real, tangible, and permanent. The fact that so many questioned a personal choice revealed just how invested the audience had become in the narrative of his transformation. Then came the AI photo debate. Edited images, filters, and deepfake rumors flooded feed. Every smiling selfie or vacation snap prompted commentary about whether it reflected who he actually was or just a polished online persona. Some viewers praised him for leveling up. Others wondered if this was a carefully curated illusion, a strategic glow-up designed to signal stability and success. The conversation shifted quickly from admiration to suspicion, and the pace of gossip accelerated. Every new post sparked hundreds of replies, each dissecting authenticity and projecting insecurities onto the real-life drama. Insecurity rumors weren't limited to appearance. Observers began speculating about his emotional state. Was he truly over Jasmine, or did the public composure hide lingering doubt? Was the confident social media presence genuine or carefully calculated to mask lingering trauma from the past relationship? These questions kept people glued to updates, dissecting minor facial expressions, tone of voice, and subtle reactions in interviews. Gino's very public rebirth became both a spectacle and a case study in modern celebrity psychology. Then came the Florida home tour. Photos and clips circulated showing a stylish new space, a stark contrast to the chaos of prior seasons. Fans debated whether this was a genuine sign of stability, a fresh start for fatherhood and family life, or just another layer of curated image control. The details sparked endless commentary, furniture choices, landscaped yard, cozy interiors, even background objects became evidence to support arguments about personal growth or performative reinvention. Every angle offered a new clue. Every floor plan became a talking point. Amid all this, the visa program rumors added yet another layer. Conversations online speculated that Gino was exploring long-term security, a future-proof plan to protect his family life. Some saw this as responsible foresight. Others questioned timing, wondering whether the same rapid escalation that drove the pregnancy and wedding could be influencing other life decisions. The tension between image, real growth, and public scrutiny created a perfect storm that kept fans engaged at every scroll. Every post, every story, every rumor functioned like a micro cliffhanger, a puzzle piece in a larger narrative the audience was desperate to decode. Is this transformation authentic or digital illusion? Does the new home reflect genuine stability or a reset attempt to erase past chaos? Every angle begged a question, kept eyes glued, and fueled the unstoppable pace of conversation. And just when the gossip seemed to peak, the next revelation loomed on the horizon, promising a collision that would test both public perception and private reality in ways nobody was ready for. The final chapter of this saga unfolded not with a bang, but with a tense, almost electric pause. Gino's journey from chaos to calm had reached its most visible peak. Public appearances, family photos, and social media updates all projected a man who had seemingly mastered his narrative. Fatherhood wasn't just a title, it was a transformation, a marker that he had moved from reactive emotional storms into proactive stability. Every photo with Natalie, every candid post about his son, reinforced this image. But beneath the surface, questions lingered. Was this piece a reflection of genuine growth, or a carefully orchestrated projection designed to signal victory over a past heartbreak? Meanwhile, Jasmine's story took a more private, complicated turn. Unlike Gino, her arc was quieter, less curated. She faced the dual weight of motherhood and personal reinvention while under the watchful eyes of a fandom ready to judge every choice. Rebuilding identity in public is messy, and she had to navigate both emotional vulnerability and accountability. Fans could see her attempts, sometimes faltering, sometimes resolute, as she worked to reclaim agency over her own life. But could this process succeed without the external validation that Gino seemed to thrive on? Could she establish long-term stability without repeating patterns that had led to repeated heartbreak? Matt, hovering on the periphery of the narrative, remained the ambiguous variable. His actions and intentions were constantly questioned, his reliability never fully confirmed, and his role in Jasmine's journey highlighted a broader truth: second acts are rarely clean. For Jasmine, every decision carried the weight of past mistakes and public scrutiny, and for the audience, every misstep became a lesson in pattern recognition, emotional caution, and human complexity. The seeds planted months ago now began to bear fruit. Gino's healing, widely applauded, was revealed as a combination of personal growth and narrative strategy. The rebound that many suspected seemed less like a desperate escape and more like a carefully timed step forward. Jasmine's perceived tragedies, meanwhile, were increasingly understood not as external impositions, but as the result of choices influenced by urgency, hope, and unresolved emotional bonds. What initially looked like destiny now appeared entangled with human error, ambition, and timing. In this final stretch, the contrast could not have been starker. One rose publicly, celebrated in the eyes of fans and media alike. The other fell, not in private obscurity, but visibly painfully under the glare of public commentary and social expectation. Yet, the true measure of success or failure remained opaque. Gino's fatherhood might secure stability, but love and compatibility are never guaranteed. Jasmine's rebuilding may forge resilience, but the shadow of prior heartbreaks lingers, threatening to repeat if lessons go unheeded. Ultimately, the story leaves us suspended between triumph and uncertainty. Both participants faced profound emotional evolution, but each path carried its own risks, revelations, and questions. Healing and rebound, victory and loss, public acclaim and private struggle all collided to form a narrative that defies simple moral assignment. By the end, it's clear the power shift was real, dramatic, and consequential, but the final outcomes for both Gino and Jasmine remain unwritten. The audience is left to watch, analyze, and wonder which of these arcs will endure, and which are destined to repeat in the unpredictable theater of life and love.